The town of Brooksville was a quiet place, where everyone knew each other, and nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. The annual garage sale was one of the few events that brought a buzz of excitement. It was during this year's garage sale that Lydia Thompson found the mask. It was a classic Mickey Mouse mask, a relic from the 1950s, buried under a pile of old toys and trinkets. She thought it would be a perfect addition to her vintage collection and bought it for a mere $1. Lydia was a collector of all things nostalgic. She loved the sense of history, the stories that objects from the past carried with them. The mask, with its big round ears and cheerful grin, seemed harmless enough. She placed it on a shelf in her living room, among her other treasures, and thought nothing more of it. That night, however, things began to change. Lydia awoke to a strange noise, a soft rustling that seemed to come from the living room. She dismissed it as the house settling or a draft, but when the noise persisted, she decided to investigate. As she approached the living room, the rustling grew louder, more distinct. It was as if something was moving on its own. She flipped on the light, and her heart skipped a beat. The Mickey Mouse mask was no longer on the shelf. It was lying in the middle of the floor, facing her. She stood frozen, her mind racing to find a rational explanation. She must have knocked it off the shelf earlier and forgotten about it, she thought, but deep down, she felt an unsettling chill. She picked up the mask, placed it back on the shelf, and returned to bed, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. Sleep, however, was elusive. She tossed and turned, her thoughts returning to the mask and the strange sensation it had given her. The next morning, Lydia woke to find the mask on the floor again. This time, it was at the foot of her bed. She stared at it in disbelief, fear creeping into her mind. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, she decided to set up a camera in the living room that night. As the sun set, Lydia prepared her camera, positioning it to capture the entire room. She placed the mask back on the shelf and turned in for the night, her nerves on edge. She lay in bed, listening intently for any sound, but the night passed uneventfully. In the morning, she eagerly reviewed the footage. To her horror, the mask did not simply fall off the shelf. It moved. Slowly, deliberately, it slid off the shelf and made its way across the room, as if guided by an invisible hand. Lydia's blood ran cold. She knew she had to get rid of the mask. She took the mask to the backyard and buried it deep in the ground, hoping that would be the end of it. But the nightmare was only beginning. That night, she was awakened by a voice, a whisper that sent chills down her spine. "Lydia." The voice was soft, almost playful, but there was a malevolence behind it that made her skin crawl. She bolted upright, her eyes scanning the darkness. The room was empty, but she could feel a presence, something watching her. The next day, she went to the library, searching for any information about the mask. She found an old newspaper article about a man named Robert Miller, a ventriloquist who performed with a Mickey Mouse puppet in the 1950s. According to the article, Miller had been accused of murdering several children during his shows. He claimed the puppet made him do it, insisting it was possessed. The townspeople didn't believe him, and he was eventually executed for his crimes. The puppet was never found. Lydia's heart raced as she read the article. Could the mask be connected to Miller's puppet? The idea seemed absurd, but the evidence was undeniable. She decided to reach out to the only person she knew who might be able to help, Father Thomas, the local priest known for his interest in the paranormal. Father Thomas listened patiently as Lydia recounted her experiences. He agreed to come to her house and perform a blessing. When he arrived, he sensed the malevolent energy immediately. Together, they dug up the mask and brought it inside. Father Thomas placed the mask on the table and began his prayers. As he did, the air grew thick with tension. The temperature dropped, and the lights flickered. Suddenly, the mask began to move, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. A deep, guttural laugh filled the room. Lydia. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was loud, menacing. Father Thomas continued his prayers, his voice unwavering. The mask shook violently, the room filled with an oppressive darkness. With a final, forceful incantation, Father Thomas commanded the spirit to leave. There was a blinding flash of light, and then, silence. The mask lay still, its eyes no longer glowing. The oppressive feeling lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Father Thomas took the mask with him, promising to dispose of it properly. Lydia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmare seemed to be over. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal for Lydia. The mask was gone, and the strange occurrences ceased. She began to feel like herself again, the memory of the events fading into the background. But one night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard it again. The soft, malevolent whisper. Lydia. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with fear. There, on the dresser, was the Mickey Mouse mask, grinning at her with a sinister glee. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization dawned on her. The nightmare was far from over.